Hello and good morning, afternoon, evening to everybody joining us from all over the world. Good morning to you, Bracken. My name is Maria Zubeldia and I head up the Entrepreneurship Centre at Saïd Business School. Would you like to get inspired amidst these difficult circumstances? Wouldn't it be helpful to have somebody sharing their fascinating journey with us? That is what our next speaker is joining in for. I am truly delighted to welcome Bracken Darrell, CEO of Logitech, who will be sharing his journey with us. Let me quickly introduce Bracken to you. As President and Chief Executive Officer of Logitech, Bracken is responsible for Logitech's strategy for growth and profitability, for the vision, for the brand, as well as for the company's operations. Bracken joined Logitech as president in 2012 and became Chief Executive Officer a year later. In this role, he has led a transformation of Logitech. He is a proponent of the importance of the liberal arts and design in business, especially of their role in innovating product experiences for consumers. He's an English major from Hendrix College. Bracken brings to Logitech experience in product and brand building through design. He has worked around the world on iconic brands like Old Spice, Gillette, and Braun, for which he was president. He has spent time in Procter & Gamble, General Electric, and Whirlpool. Since he took over 8 years ago, Logitech has been a top performer on the SIX Swiss Stock Exchange and on the Nasdaq. The company's profits have grown more than five-fold in the same period, and its market value has approximately doubled every 2.5 years. Last but not least, Bracken holds an MBA from Harvard Business School. Well, it's my real pleasure to introduce you to Bracken Darrell. Bracken, I cannot wait to listen to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Maria. It is so nice to be here and nice to see all of you. I will quickly share my screen and then I'll get started. So first I would be completely missing something important if I didn't tell you that Wendy Becker, who is our chair, is also on your board, or is on the board of the Oxford Business School. And she has been transformational for us and for me as a partner over the last 3 or 4 years. And as you'll see, this ride that we've been on has been particularly exciting the last 3 or 4 years. So just a few things to start. I grew up in a small town in Kentucky, 53,000 people in the middle of the U.S. If you don't know where Kentucky is, you may know where a Kentucky Fried Chicken is. And that same small town still has 53,000 people. I went from there to Hendrix College, which is in Arkansas, and then I went from there to, I lived in different parts of the world. My first trip out of the country, out of the U.S. At all, was when I was 20 years old, and I went to England. So I would have loved to have gone to Oxford. I dreamed of becoming a Rhodes Scholar, which would have been very difficult for me to do with my academic background, but I have a lot of respect for Oxford. I want to go ahead and get started and tell you first that Logitech is not a young company. You know, we'll be 40 October 2nd of this year, and like many old companies, we have a long story. But before I get to the part of my story, I want to tell a little bit before the scenes. Now, before I arrived, we had an incredible story, and we started about the same time that the Silicon Valley really got rolling. During that period, just a few years before Apple had started, and of course Microsoft was already in business, and the founders were 3 Europeans. One was a man named Daniel Darrell, who was from Apple's Switzerland, and the other 2 were Italians. The Daniel Darrell, who's still out there on a boat somewhere today and actually has a house in London, used to, when he'd go home and see his mom back in his house in Apples, it was early enough that he when he came back, she knew she was in the tech world, and she often, a few times, confused him for Steve Jobs, or at least thought he was the founder of Apple Computer instead of Logitech. The ride was pretty amazing. From 1981 to 1997, which was a 17-year run, we were a one-product company, the mouse, and that product took us all the way from an OEM, so we sold only to other large companies doing mice, into the public with our own brand, and then into the public markets. We went public in 1987, and then finally in 1998, we boldly and bravely launched our second product, which was a big gamble at the time, very high risk, and perceived as potentially unlikely to be successful, and that was the keyboard. Now, if you look back at or you look at us now, you think, why did they think that the keyboard was so risky? Because we were manufacturing our own mice for everybody, for us and for everybody else. We had a great cost position, but in keyboards we didn't manufacture and still don't manufacture most of our keyboards. And so the thought was, how can we win if we're competing with people making them? And of course, the only way to win was through innovation and brand building. So I'll talk a little bit about that later. If you roll right through there, we had the longest sustained period of double-digit top line and double-digit bottom line growth any company has ever had on the NASDAQ or the Swiss Stock Exchange. We had 39 consecutive quarters of double-digit top and bottom line growth, starting in 1998 and ending in 2008. So quite a run. In 2008, not only did the financial crisis come, but we also had a difficult time. And for the next 4 years, we experimented. The reason we did was because the same thing happened to us that happens to most companies, or all companies, if they stick around long enough, is the thing that got you there stops working. And the thing that got us there was the PC. The PC grew in an unsustained way from the early 80s all the way through about 2010. And in 2010, it slowed, stopped, and then started to decline as the iPad came out and people began to use their phones as alternatives to the computer, especially in places like Africa, India, Indonesia, the emerging markets. The growth really came to a stall. And so for the next 4 years, we did what any company would do in such a situation. We experimented. And that experimentation included acquisitions, entry into new categories, a lot of the things that anybody would do. And unfortunately, they didn't work. So we had 4 years of difficult performance where we declined. And in fact, the business that we had, which was predominantly a mouse and keyboard business, just kept in a state of first stasis, and then looked like it would be at a long-term secular decline. And that's when they brought me in. This is now my first year, which was fiscal year 2013. They brought me in, explicitly to lead the company long term, but also to try to do a turnaround. And like great turnaround experts, which I was not, I had an immediate impact in that first year. Things got a lot worse. As you can see, the decline we'd been on, which was not negative 7%, got worse. We dropped 7%. Our operating profit dropped down to $67 million. We actually lost, from a GAAP standpoint, so generally accepted accounting principles for you non-accountants out there. From a GAAP standpoint, we lost over $200 million, the most the company's ever lost. In fact, probably more loss than the company's accumulated over its entire life in all the years where we might have lost money put together, even those early years. So it was not a good year. You could see our earnings per share were horrible. And you might ask, how in the world did you pull that one off? Well, this was a classic turnaround period where we shrunk the number of products that we were selling. We cut the number of product families in half, almost in half, from about 350 down into the upper 180s. We restructured the business, that horrible thing you sometimes have to do when your growth and your overhead gets ahead of your growth in your top line. So we reduced the overall number of people by 13%, the number of vice presidents and directors, so the senior level people, by about a fourth, so 24%, 23, 24%. And the results of that year were tough. And you know, and when they brought me in, I think there was a lot of question around whether the company could stay independent. And so it went. Now, the rest of the stories, you know, I probably wouldn't be presenting to you if that was the end of the story, of course, and it's not. We did several things, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, but we got immediately on a growth path. I had, you know, we did all this change that I mentioned, and I'll talk about a few of those in a minute. We began to turn around, and immediately in the next year, we had an incredible growth rate of 2% in fiscal year 14, which I'm not showing here. And then fiscal year 15 was 4%. So we didn't exactly take off like a rocket. And from then on, we've been at or near double digits since 2015. And as you can see, the earnings per share really turned around, and we ended up in a period where we grew for that entire period at a pretty sustained rate. And of course, in this pandemic year, we'll talk about that more in a few minutes, we've had a very high growth rate, 57 to 60%. And anyway, the bottom line is it's been a good story. This is and now Maria mentioned this is our stock price during the period. When I joined, I think we were trading it, to be very precise, $8.04. We got down to $6.24. I managed to get us down that far during that first year that I was here. And then we started to perform, and we, you know, and this all makes it sound so easy. So it, of course, wasn't, but we doubled in value almost exactly. If you dropped a line every 2.5 years from about April 1st of 2013 to today, we've doubled in value every 2.5 years. Now let's talk about how did we do that. The most important thing we've done during that period, I would say, is to decide where we're going to play. And we really tried to position the business behind 4 large secular trends. Now, we tried other things, a lot of other things in the meantime, and I'll come back to that. But 4 large secular trends. The first large secular trend, and I'll point it to the one right in the center of the page here. We call it remote work here, but in the beginning, we always talked about it as work from anywhere. And so our view was, if we could create products that enable people to work from anywhere, we could be part of the future. And we knew that trend of not just working in an office, but working from a Starbucks, or working from your couch, or working from your home, or really working from anywhere was going to be a big deal. And we felt like that trend was an unstoppable trend as people moved to a more and more comfortable casual life, where your work life and your personal life began to blend. Of course, we couldn't have foreseen this pandemic, but we did foresee that there'd be a time when people would be working at least half the time outside of an office. The second large secular trend that we saw coming really early was the trend of video everywhere. So on the left side of your screen there, video everywhere to us meant, you know, we were in the video business in a way already, and we watched as people people began to make video calling a higher priority. They were using very expensive video conference rooms, and we video enabled everything, because at the time we had a video conferencing business that was a totally integrated business, very small. But we video enabled every one of our rooms, and we immediately discovered how good it was. And I still remember driving home from work, my first week at Logitech, actually, on a Friday night, after video calling all day long, and being a little dizzy when I was on an audio call in the car, and thinking, wow, once people get hooked on this, it's very hard to leave. And so we decided, we knew video was going to be everywhere. And so that was a big secular trend we believed in. The third one was the rise of esports. You know, many of you who grew up playing video games will be able to relate to this one, but many who couldn't in the beginning. But we believed very quickly, because partly because I had kids who were big video gamers, that video gaming would become a professional sport, and it might even become the biggest collection of sports in the world, bigger than even any sport. And I can talk more about that later, but the bottom line is that we really believe that, and I still believe that. And this was the very early days before it had even kind of congealed into a real sport. Today, more people watch the League of Legends final out of Shanghai live, over 100 million people. At one point, over 1 billion people watched it either asynchronously. Some part of the League of Legends tournament that ended their season. Well, over 1 billion people, over 100 million people watched it live, and more than watched the Super Bowl. The final trend that we got behind, and this is in some ways our most recent one to jump on board with, is what we call the democratization of content creation, and that is the clear reality that we're going to watch more content over time created by each other than by big companies like the BBC or Disney or Columbia Pictures or anybody who's or Netflix or Amazon. We're not more content from each other than we're from them. And to watch content from each other, we're going to want the tools that make that content creation better and better. And so if we could get into categories that supported that, that looks interesting. So we went after these 4 big secular trends with a few categories, sometimes one category at a time. And that is part of the secret of our growth. It's a lot. One of my principles is it's so much easier to grow if you're in growing categories than it is if you're not. And while that point might be obvious, it wasn't obvious to me at points in my career. So I didn't always do that. Now I want to talk about a few other things. I'm going to shift gears for a minute and talk about a few more kind of leadership principles and things. One of the things that happened to us along the way, that happened to me along the way, was that I realized that once you've had a period that some people would call successful, it's really scary, and the reason it's scary is because you realize if you've never had a period of really long sustained success in your life, you think you really want to be successful, and then once you've had a period where you're really successful in something, and all of you probably have, you start to realize that inside you somewhere, you want to hang on to that. And that desire to hang on to your own success, to try to stay successful, becomes the biggest impediment to your long-term success. So it's this very circular, strange argument that the reality that nobody wants to lose what they've got. And so by trying not to lose what you've got, you often end up playing more conservatively or not experimenting into new things. And so that feeling I've had several times since I've been at Logitech. The first one was 3 or 4 years ago when I had it was a January, I think it was a December night before the Christmas holiday. And I was really thinking about the next year and setting goals. And I really questioned whether I was the right person to run the company. It'd been about 5 years. And I thought, am I really the right person for the next 5 years? We're so different than we were 5 years ago. Surely the next person should be different. And so I wrote down the spec for what that person should look like. And I really carefully thought about it in bullet point form. And then I wrote down my background, and I thought, well, I'd be in the hunt for the job. I might or might not be the first choice, but that's always a personal choice. I thought, but the problem I have is I know too much. And so because I knew too much, I thought there's no way I can be the right person for the next job. I helped, define every strategy, picked all the leadership team, was involved in almost every product in the company. It'll be too hard for me to be cold-blooded enough and objective enough about what to do going forward. And so I decided I wasn't the right person going forward. So I decided I was going to leave, and I decided to fire myself. And I did. And then I thought, but I'd learned over the last several years that it's amazing how much happens when you go to bed at night. And something's happening while you're in that bed and you're in your dreams and your mind is working. And I understand a lot of important things are happening when you sleep, but one of them is you're filtering through decisions you made the day before sometimes. And so I learned that if I sleep on decisions, I often wake up the next morning and have a different perspective on them. So I fired myself that night. I was fully intent on talking to my chairman, who at the time was not Wendy Becker, the next day about my decision and how we could plan a transition that could take a long time. It could take 6 months to a year, but that we would get ready for that. When I woke up the next morning, as probably happens 51% of the time for me on big decisions, I realized I was wrong the night before. I reversed that decision, and I made a different decision. The decision I made was that I would go back to Logitech, but only as a newcomer and with no sacred cows. And I had to sign a contract with myself that nothing I'd done before was off limits to change or to reverse. And so I came into work the next day feeling like a newcomer. And it was quite a feeling. And it might sound a little silly, but I really did get myself into the mindset of the newcomer. And I very quickly made some significant changes. I didn't take it, nothing was sacred for me. And about a month later, 2 months later, I shared that with my leadership team. And I told them the story. And at the end of it, I said, and I'd like you this coming weekend to do the same thing. Please, go back and fire yourself. And then decide if you want to rehire yourself the next morning. And if you do, fantastic, we'll take you back we'll take you as a newcomer. And if you don't, then go do something else. Of course, none of them left at the time. But at the end of that, I came back actually a few days later and I said, I left out one part of the story, which is if you don't fire yourself, I will, and I won't hire you back. And I wasn't being mean. I really just felt like that we needed to be to objective reset. Now we've done this again, just this last December. We've had, more time of being successful. And so we've kind of all done it as a leadership team. This time we didn't fire ourselves. I didn't fire anybody, but I did ask everybody to just, please leave the company, leave the old Logitech behind over the holiday, come back. And I actually sent them all an offer letter on January 3rd, inviting them to a new company called Logitech. And then we started immediately I asked them all to go through over the next 2 or 3 weeks and write a letter to themselves and to me with start, stop, continue, what we would change in the company. And we're in that process now. So that's one thing I wanted to talk to you about. I'm going to skip to this slide. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about was a few other concepts that I'm just personally kind of passionate about. One of them, I'll start, I guess, in the bottom here. One of the things that there are 2 words that I really dislike in the English language, and I would dislike them in any language. I speak Spanish, and they're no better in that language. And those 2 words are success, for the reasons I described earlier. I'm not against the idea of feeling confidence when things work, that you put your hard work or good thinking into. But I'm very against the idea of this sustained successfulness or success, feeling successful, because it seems to always come with this bad guy or this villain, which is the desire to keep it. And so I don't like success, and I also don't like the word failure. And that's a little easier to dislike for everybody because nobody likes to fail. I don't like the word failure because actually I think you shouldn't mind, in quotation marks, failing on a very regular basis. In fact, you're very good at it because that's how we learn and grow most of the time. And so failure I'd like to just take that out of vocabulary. The only failures that really exist in my vocabulary are things that are things you do over and over again that you've learned don't work, or things that are you only do once, but the downsides are so significant and you can't control the risk on them. And so you only have one chance to fail. So those two kinds of failure, those are failures. Everything else is not a failure. So I have a principle. I'd like to just take success and failure out of my vocabulary, and I'd suggest, if you kind of buy into this, to take it out of yours. I'll cover a couple of other things quickly. One of them is the concept of gravity. This is of course, you know what gravity is, or we kind of know what gravity is. If you're a physicist, you know that we don't entirely know what gravity is. But we do know that gravity is something that seems to make very large things slow other things down or attract them. Now, the reason I'm putting it up there is because I learned that in business, if you're trying to create new things, new small things that you're going to experiment your way into success with, you need to try to move them away from the very large things in your business. So if you have a very large business that's very mature, like I did, the mouse and keyboard business, as we're experimenting with new things, I didn't report those new businesses into them. We created something called trees, plants, and seeds. And the trees are very large business. And the plants, and especially the seeds, we separated completely and reported separately, so they didn't get slowed down as resource trade-offs happen. No matter how enthusiastic my leaders were that were running the very large businesses, and no matter how much they wanted the small businesses, the new seeds, if I gave it to them in the beginning, things went well, but eventually they either got distracted or the resources just didn't seem to stay in the right place. And so I wound up believing that you need to separate innovation that's on the very small things, especially if it's completely outside of the very large businesses. That's a second learning. And then the last one I'll cover just very briefly as we're finishing is the power of pairs. You know, I grew up playing sports, especially basketball, and I thought a lot about teams and the power of teams and the importance of teams. And I spent most of my life I've thought about how teams can be better, and I really viewed myself as a team leader and somebody who was good with teams, and maybe I could even be a good coach. You know, I realized though that it's very elusive, and the larger the team, the worse the performance, and the more difficult it is to manage. The smaller the team, I became very attracted to small teams about 15 years ago, and I decided that I really want to only be involved with small teams as much as I can. And I remembered the team of 5 that sat at my kitchen table as I was growing up, and I had a single mom, my 3 siblings, and we'd sit at that table and do homework every night. And that team was one of the most effective teams I've ever been on, and it's because I was learning all the time. But there was something else going on there, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized that actually smaller and smaller teams seem to be really good. There can be very effective larger teams or mid-sized teams. But I finally decided a few years ago, I think the secret to teams, and this may be an amazing grasp of the obvious for some of you. I think the secret to great teams is that actually the only size team that really exists is a team of 2. So it's the smallest team you have. And the reason I say it is because if you think about it, in any team you're in, the interaction that you're having is really one at a time. So I decided that pairs are really the way to think about teams. And larger teams of say 5 people or say 3 people are actually just 3 different pairs of people. If 2 people are talking, somebody is always listening. Somebody is kind of a bystander, a spectator. And if you start to think of your teams as pairs, you start to think differently about how to be a great player on a team, how to create great teams. It's about creating great multiples of pairs. And you can have multiple pairs in your life, and you can have great teams, so many great teams in your life. There's probably more to talk about that than I could possibly go through right now because I'm still learning about it. But I do believe there's something there. I will close now by just saying, you know, it's been an incredible ride at Logitech, and I really feel like we're just getting started. You know, we've gone from being worth about $1 billion to being worth, you know, over 17 now in 9 years, almost 9 years. But the most exciting part of this job, I believe, in this company is ahead of us. Maria, I want to thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure spending some lunchtime with you, very early morning California time. And I hope anybody can feel free to pop me a note if you'd like to, if you're looking for anything I can do to help you. I'm on LinkedIn. And Maria, thanks again.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Bracken, for sharing your wonderful insights and experience with us. Well, it's really helpful to learn also that you struggled at the beginning too. I found it very inspiring. I might think about firing myself too. That was a great idea. Well, it's been lovely to have you, and I wish you all the very best in your future endeavors. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. For our audience, I hope you enjoyed the session as much as I did. In the next session, we will be having an amazing panel to look at the future of education. It's called EdTech is the End of the Traditional Classroom as We Know It. It will start in a couple of minutes, in 1 minute actually, at 2 p.m. UK time. See you all there. Thank you.